the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jen Braun, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today, in a very special April Fool's Day episode, we're turning the tables on your regular host, Jenn Zahrt. I'm Jen Braun, usually in the background producing the show, but today I'm sitting in the host chair, and Jen is my guest. So here with me, beaming in from Olympia, Washington, is the executive director and founder of the CAELi Institute. Jen, welcome to your own show.
Hi, Jen. Thank you. Thank you for stepping out of the shadows and into the limelight, and it feels kind of weird to be in the hot seat.
I bet. Well, I'm honored to be here in front of the microphone today, and it's always a delight to chat with you. So tell us a little about the Celestial Arts Education Library for folks that are new.
So CAELi came out of a winding pathway of my own love of astrology, and it's designed to answer a question that starts to unfold when you begin astrological research, because you'll go to a used bookshop and you'll find a couple books and you'll get excited about finding something you've never seen before that maybe isn't for sale in the typical bookstore or whatever. And you begin your mini astrological library and you join a community of other people geeking out about astrology books. But when you really get into trying to unpack what's going on underneath the hood of the text and you get to the footnotes and the bibliographies, you realize, where can I find these things? And you start looking in any kind of public library and they say, oh, we don't have that, but if you want to wait 3 months, interlibrary loan might be able to let you lend it, but we just don't know. And then all of a sudden the momentum just gets cut off at the knees and you're like, I just want to do some research. Where's this stuff? And then you might hear about my colleague and co-conspirator, Philip Graves in England. He's got, in Wales actually, a library that's quite extensive, but to get over there, it's quite a trek. And, you know, it's kind of a thing where I thought, here we have an opportunity to take advantage of my collection of collections, because I sort of had this voracious appetite for astrology books and kept rescuing collections of books with the idea of like, one day I'll open up a library. But during the pandemic, Kepler College decided to go completely digital. And so I was like, hey, I will rescue these books and create the institution of CAELi to give a home for this type of research where you can just flit across the room and instantly get the resource that is being cited in the bibliography or footnote of some other work and kind of accelerate your ability to understand what you're looking at. And it's been such an amazing thing to catalog the collection here, blending 6 different collections into one and continue to add things that, you know, are missing, and to get that immersive download of where our community's been in textual form, and also cross-check and compare and just do the research that I think is going to push us into the next level of our community.
That's such a cool idea. How many volumes do you have there at the library?
So we're not done counting, but I would estimate 10,000 discrete things. Sometimes there's doubles, sometimes there's different printings. I have this anthropological fantasy of collecting a version of every single print edition of a book just to see on the nitty-gritty if something's changed, because when I was in graduate school getting my degree in German literature at UC Berkeley, it's one of those moments where you're just stumbling around a city. I was in Berlin, and this book just screamed off the shelf at me. I was trying to write my PhD thesis, and I knew I wanted it to be about astrology, but I wasn't quite sure how to get started. And there I am in Kreuzberg, and I just go into this used bookshop, and for €5, there was this little blue book that said The Spirit of Astrology in German, Der Geist der Astrologie. And it just flew off the shelf at me, and I started looking at it, and it said, 4th printing, 70,000 copies in 1937. But then I looked in and said, well, that's the 4th edition. When was the 1st edition? 1922. Now, I don't know if you know anything about German history, but between 1922 and 1937, a lot of change took place.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of things were not present in that 4th edition that were very much there in the 1st edition. So the Nazis edited a lot of things out of that book, and they let it still be printed, or they edited them out so that the Nazis wouldn't ban it or whatever. But the idea is that against the backdrop of a dictatorship being established, you know, the book itself had to change on subtle levels that were not referenced anywhere. So you had to read the first printing and the fourth printing and cross-check word for word to see what got changed and does that change the meaning? Because you read an astrology book and it's like, Saturn means this. And it's like, but if it's been edited, then that's a whole entire thing. So that's another sort of collection fantasy of this place, is that you can come here and actually do that granular research into seeing how subtle shifts in even just these sentences can vastly alter how someone is seeing a thing.
What you're doing is huge, and I think it's so important for our community. So if people can join CAELi, they can become a member. And could you talk a little bit about the benefits of membership?
So becoming a member of CAELi is a show of support for the existence of CAELi, and members receive digital communications in the form of newsletters. There is a journal called the CAELi Review that comes out every cross quarters, just because we have to be a bit queer and not just do things on the solstice and equinox like a lot of the other orgs. But the idea is that you could get scans of materials, but we are not a lending library yet. At the moment, I'm the only full-time employee here, and I do have a network of people volunteering to help and doing independent contractor work, but we don't have the capacity to be a lending library. And also, if you come here from far away to spend some time doing some really in-depth work, the last thing you want is to be looking for a book that happens to be sent over to another person's house and they've got it for a long time. Like, you want to come here and have everything at your disposal, or if it's not on the shelf, there's just someone at a different desk in the other room looking at it. And you can say, hey, can I borrow that for a few minutes? So I can see in the future, at some point, with enough support and community investment, we could sustain having a lending program. But at the moment, our membership numbers are not high enough to support that kind of thing. So if that's something you want, don't wait. Just jump in, and with enough people getting excited, we can actually generate that.
Yeah, join.
But what you do get as a member is the request for scans, and we always have to do a copyright check. And once that check has been made, if it's public domain, we can send you a copy of the book digitally. And then if it's in the copyright, we have to look at what percentage of the book we're allowed to send you. And then we can send you the table of contents, and you can say, okay, just send me chapter 5 or whatever that might be. Because, we have to respect the fact that we're not legally allowed to distribute things. But if you're doing research, then there's sort of a leeway there. Just depends on the request. So you can make any request, and we can also say, hey, if your request is denied, you haven't used up a point. You've just made a request that, it's okay. Go back and try again. But membership also in aggregate supports the existence of this so that one day when you do come, it's here.
What are one or two of the examples of the really rare stuff that you have that people would be really excited to learn about?
Personally exciting to me are the journals from the 1920s in Germany that I collected in the course of getting my master's degree at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David. The Sophia Center has a program where you can study cultural astronomy and astrology, and so I wanted to go into sources that I couldn't use in my PhD thesis at Berkeley in the German department and look at the technical astrology being discussed inside the journals. So I went on to abebooks.com and collected a bunch of primary sources in German where they're talking about all of the community tensions going on in their contemporary moment of astrology in that astrological community. And Jen, they are talking the same way we talk. They are talking about the same problems. They are still saying, how do we make astrology legitimate? How do we create research centers for astrology? There was an entire, group of people who said, you can't be in our astrology club unless you have a doctorate. There were multiple streams of astrology groups and conferences and all kinds of publications erupting all over the place. And it was we have no idea, but nothing's changed. If we can just translate from German to English, which was what my life goal became when I figured out, we've been reinventing the wheel, and let's stop that. Let's read those primary sources and figure out what was being said already. Why haven't we solved these problems yet? I think it's because we haven't looked to see what's been said before. Even in Facebook groups, people talk, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is something that's been published about 30 different times, and I can take you into this room in this building and show you exactly which publications are speaking to the very thing that you say no one solved before, So that's personally exciting to me. There are 5 sets of Project Hindsight pamphlets, which seem to be very popular for people to get their hands on because they're out of print. And what I find super cool is the self-publishing has always been a stream inside of our community. So there are things here you would have no idea about, and then you get here and you're like, oh my gosh, look at this. Oh my gosh, look at that. And they're all self-published with those binders. When you would go to the laser copier store and they would have that plastic binding thing, they punch a hole in the side and all these little rectangles come out and then they put that plastic binding thing on it.
Totally.
There's an entire wall full of those things. So astrologers have been DIYing it from jump. But the problem with that is there's no place to understand and collectively come together to look at these materials. And over the course of our own English-speaking history in this country, Michael Earlywine did create the Heart Center Library. But he got older and wanted to go on to other things. And Kepler had their library open for a while, but in the pandemic, they decided to become completely digital. There's some library in Chicago. There's been libraries in various places, but it's like we forget.
It's awesome that CAELi can be an answer to some of this. And I can say, just being behind the scenes for this past almost a year that we've been working together, and all of the different guests that you've been working with, seeing CAELi grow, hearing the different stories, I'm just so excited to be a part of what you're building. I think CAELi's really important. Yay to you, yay to CAELi. And, we're a small, independent little podcast. It's just you and me helping to put the show out every week. I thought this would be also a good opportunity to just chat with folks a bit about how they can support the show. So tell us.
Well, listening is amazing, and for free, for the small cost of 5 seconds of your time, you can navigate to Apple Podcasts and click on that 5 stars, or you can navigate to YouTube and click on that tiny subscribe button. And actually, if you have another 2 seconds, leave a little comment. Those add up. There's this algorithm that we're also fighting. And it's any tiny little engagement you can give us and comments, if you're listening to the podcast on Spotify, pop over to the YouTube and subscribe there too. And that's where you can actually interact with the show and ask questions or even clarifications or share your own experience with the books. All of that matters. And if you've ever produced a podcast, you know how much energy goes into it. And Jen has been one of the pillars keeping me on track with a weekly show, which is a whole education for me and what it takes to keep this thing going on a consistent basis. So thank you, Jen. And thank you for... Oh my
gosh. I love this so much. And I just want to echo what you said. It really is fast to rate or review the show. And I know that's in the outro, but it really does help other people find the show. And when other people find the show, we'll build more listeners, which will entice more people to join CAELi and learn about CAELi. So, another thing that I want to mention is that in the show notes, there is a link to bookshop.org. And CAELi has a page on bookshop.org. So if you're ever listening to the show and there's a book that sounds interesting to you and you want to purchase it, please do it through the bookshop.org page. It helps kick just a few dollars CAELi's way, and it also is a really easy way to support the show if you're going to be buying the book anyway.
Yeah, it's an affiliate link, so that's, full transparency there. But if you navigate through our show notes, it's all set up and ready to go. And there's an entire book list. Last time I checked, that book list is pushing 100 titles since we started the show.
Looking good. Yeah.
I'm oh my goodness, look at this. This is a dream come true,
And Jen, why don't you talk a little bit about sponsorship?
Yeah, if you notice, there's been a couple ads sprinkled throughout from the beginning of the show, showcasing some of my mentors and classes that have been sponsored at CAELi and running through CAELi. And right now you'll hear that we have our Saturn ball ad. So if you wanted to become a trial member, you can get yourself a nice Saturn squeeze ball. And it's shaped like Saturn and has the little hexagon pole star with the CAELi logo on it.
With the ring around it.
And it's really helpful for when you're doing research and you're frustrated, or even if you're just frustrated, or if you need Saturn remediation. We're trying to give you those tools as CAELi members. But if you would like to see your ad in the middle of the show and sponsor an episode, then you can reach out to us at podcast@withinorb.com, and we can talk about the options.
Awesome. Well, let's jump in, Jen. What's the first astrology book you ever read?
So the first astrology book I ever read is Alan Oken's Complete Astrology. But at the time I was reading it, I also got an ephemeris, an atlas for the Americas, an atlas for the international world, the rest of the world basically, and a book of tables that was the Koch Book of Tables. And I had no computer at the time. I had just been grounded for reasons that we can talk about on another show. And my German teacher from high school saw that I was sad, and he goes, "What time were you born? What day were you born? Where were you born?" I'm thinking to myself, what is this guy on about? I loved my German teacher. He's on an earlier episode.
Gary Lorentzen. Everyone should check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes to it.
Yeah. So he was like, oh, can you go to Powell's? And I'm like, that's the only place I'm allowed to go right now. And he goes, okay, get these books. And he jotted down a little list of books for me. And he mentioned Alan Oken's Complete Astrology. So I got my parents to drive me to Powell's Books in Portland, and I got all the books. And he goes, if you have any questions, let me know. And that's how it all got started. Now, I jumped into Alan Oken's Complete Astrology, and I thought, ooh, it's got 3 books in one, As Above, So Below, The Horoscope, The Road, and Its Travelers, and Astrology, Evolution, and Revolution. And I'm just digging into the symbols. And it's this very methodical introduction to all of the things that you would need to know, the signs, the planets, the houses, etc. And then I had questions percolating to the top, and the effect of it was Alan Oken was answering my questions. Astrology was answering questions. So I had grown up in an agnostic household. My dad was Anglican, my stepmom was Jewish, and at the age of 6, my cousin died of cystic fibrosis. And I knew as a child growing up she was sick and that was going to eventually happen. But when it actually did happen, I asked, well, where did she go? Did she go to heaven? And my stepmom said, well, I don't believe in heaven. And I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, no, Jews don't believe in heaven. And I thought, oh, but you're cool and I believe you. So there's a heaven and there's a not heaven. And so you're both kind of having alternate beliefs, right? And so I thought, maybe I'm just going to suspend spiritual or religious, whatever, and kind of just hold it out there and see for myself. But in all of the years between 6 and 15 of seeing for myself, nothing had answered my questions like astrology did. Suddenly, my questions were getting a direct, very explicit answer, and I thought to myself, why don't more people know about this? This is really satisfying. I want to have my answers, and I mean, pray all you want, but astrology is giving you okay, do this, and then this, and it's going to take this long, and then there's going to be this after that, and, and it was very directive, and I'm like, I can dig this. And I became instantly incensed that it was something that was underground or not well known, or there was a prejudice against it in the educational system. And I'm like, this is cool stuff. This should be something everybody knows about.
It is cool once you start learning astrology and tracking it in your own life, the accuracy, and it really opens up your eyes.
Yeah, it was like a whole world opened up, and I thought to myself, oh, if you're asking God for answers, he might give them to you, but if you want them right, faster, go to astrology.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take spirituality out of it, I mean, Alan Oken himself was a very spiritual figure. It's just that I was getting nouns and verbs instead of just kind of hope,
That's a great way to say it. So Alan Oken, anything else that got you started?
I mean, after that, I really went to the Powell's bookshelf in Portland, which had a pretty advanced collection of used astrology books, given that it's Portland, Oregon, and there's lots of astrologers there. And so I just kind of would collect a bunch of stuff, but it was a lot of material that wasn't steeped in the classical stream of astrology, because that wasn't really being published at that time in the late 90s. If people had them, they weren't putting them into the circulation in the used bookshops. So I got a lot of Jeff Wolfe Greene and these kinds of more theosophically or psychological-based astrologies, and that I thought was what astrology was, until about 2010. Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show.
So, Jen, every week you ask guests what 3 books they would bring to a remote location. Now, this week, since I'm in Minneapolis, I thought your isolated trip could be somewhere in the Midwest. So let's fling you into the Badlands.
Oh, no.
What's the first of the 3 titles in your backpack?
All right. Well, I have to take Jane Ritter-Patrick's A Handbook of Medical Astrology, because I'm on trip. I'm going to fall. I'm going to have to use a poultice. I'm going to get, all kinds of
You never know what'll happen to you in the Badlands.
I'm telling you, right? Like, it's going to be, I mean, actually, I might know if I have her book with me. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, A Handbook of Medical Astrology. Jane Ritter-Patrick is a phenomenal astrologer from Scotland. And in this work, she talks about classical medical astrology, but she also talks about how the astrological advice includes a perspective of the way that astrology can see the quality of your inner life at the moment. So it's not just a physical, medical kind of, oh, you're presenting with this symptom, there's a blister, there's a wart. It's more like what we can do for people about the underlying, and this sounds very new age, and that's not her at all, but it's this dis-ease. It's like by looking at the full chart and seeing what kind of temperamental figures, like if the too much heat from too many fire planets or not enough heat from this or that, it gives the astrologer a way of addressing a deeper level of consciousness than just the physical. And so I really appreciate this book for that reason. And I think it's something that needs to be in everyone's toolkit, especially if you're in a remote place. It talks about the herbs that are related to each planet. And again, that's also a topic of like, there's never just one herb to one planet. It's not a one-to-one. It's a multiplicity. It's almost like it'll help you like see what's in your immediate environment and understand the nuances of how the astrology is presenting itself to you while you're in that quote-unquote middle of nowhere, except that we're very much linked no matter where we are to the rest of the planet too.
So it sounds like it's more about whole person wellness.
Yeah, and she goes into very technical medical astrology as well. I've always been fascinated by the history of medicine, and so looking at astrological medicine or the intersections between medicine and astrology is always amazing because you can see the anomalies that might crop up, or just looking at different like parts of the human body and, you know, how everything relates to itself as a system. And it's about well-being, really, and how to work with the world. And you know, I think anytime we begin to study astrology on that level, whether it's looking at celestial agriculture through alchemy or medical astrology, we start to see how, oh, I'm eating jalapeños because I'm really just mad. Maybe I just need to express anger instead of blowing my mouth out with this hot food, you know, like, then you start to have those subtle realizations of one's own behavior, or also a witness behavior of others, and maybe engage with them slightly differently. Like, you know, oh, I have this Eeyore figure, this super melancholy. Let me find a way to like either like match that and help them feel better, or match that and simply like wallow in it with them, you know. But you can start to see it from a, you know, like you don't necessarily always need a chart. And I think that the way that Jane points your attention to how medicine and astrology interact, it widens your lens also on how you can practice astrology, because it's incorporating temperament, which I think is really foundational to seeing how people are in the world to a certain extent, and just understanding there are going to be people who are just different than you. And I think also that reaches back to my experience with Alan Oken. When he writes about Taurus, I was like, oh, that's why I get along with Taurians that way. Like, I can never flip them into another mode to make them more like my chart. And it's like, oh, that increased my tolerance levels by like magnitudes, because I could understand and appreciate the Taurianness of that, which was at that point foreign to me. So it's the kind of thing where she's saying like, you can see how people are constituted in these various ways, but also astrologically from the technique standpoint, looking at specific degree areas differently through the lens of what they relate to in the human body. It's not just like a degree symbol of like, oh, at the second degree of Libra, you're going to find all this, you know, Mark Edmund Jones or Elsie Wheeler's sort of like fantasy symbol that's there, or the Elias Lunsdale symbols that have come up a lot in the show so far. This is literally like, what body part is that addressing, you know?
Yeah,
so you can kind of start to appreciate like a different element of those degree areas, which you would take a long time to study. So by the time I'm like hobbling my way out of the Badlands, I might be a medical expert in astrology.
That feels like a very practical book to bring. You'll need that one.
Yeah. You know, like keep your medicine with you. Like pick a trick's fine. I can magic my way out of it. But I'm like, but if my foot's broken, you know, how long will this foot be broken? I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Well, cool. So what's the second book in your satchel?
So the second one is a book that I've admired a long time and have used to write daily horoscopes, mostly because when I read it, my gaze softens and I kind of trance out, and it's a humanistic astrology book. So I think humanistic astrology has fallen by the wayside with the popularity of the current traditional and classical emphases, but it is A Handbook for the Humanistic Astrologer by Michael R. Meyer, with a preface by Dane Rudyard. And this is a fantastic resource for looking at all elements of astrological practice, including very strange aspects that were introduced after Kepler deformed the zodiac, like protein being cooked. So this book begins with talking about the philosophy of astrology from a humanistic standpoint, and I think this is a massive contribution from the 20th century astrologers, and it leads up to what Alan Oken produced as well. But I think that looking at the symbolic language from this vantage point, it's providing another layer of patina over how one can engage with the symbols that I think is important to revisit after having had a solid education in the classical and traditional techniques. For me, in this moment, I'm choosing this one because I want to go back and study it better and more and not just turn to that page where it talks about the biceptile, right? I want to sort of see like the full systematic approach to that humanistic symbolism and this idea of like the development of a person, and also do it again at the level of pushing back against how they're defining what a person is, you know? So it's sort of this dual thing of reading it to revisit what my own lineage is, but also looking at it from a vantage point of post-structuralism and kind of this animistic perspective of like, can we update this? Can we make it a post-humanistic astrology?
Is it a book that teaches you how to think instead of what to think?
I think it brings you on board with a systems thinking approach to the way that the planets and aspects and houses interlock. So I think it is actually both in a way.
Okay.
Because it's maybe impossible for someone to teach you how to think without teaching you what to think. And I think it's that individual reader's critical leap that elevates out of the, here are the guardrails and here's how you can escape them without dying. But, you know, like I said before, when I was talking about Alan Oken's work and then the other things available in the used bookshop, I thought that's all astrology was. And actually still to this day, most people who go to Half Price Books and see what's there think that's all there is. If you go to the Theosophical Library in Seattle, it looks the same as Half Price Books because that's what they think astrology is. So when you can come to a place like CAELi and understand that there's so much more and that you don't know what you don't know until you're just completely immersed in it, it's important, I think, to also enter each contribution with your own suspension of disbelief and just be like, okay, I'm going to pretend like I'm just meeting astrology for the first time through Michael Meyer. What do I get? And you get a whole entire interpretational system that has stood the test of time and distilled some of the more complicated things that Dane Rudyard talks about and makes it functional for an interpretive tack. Now, is it the best one? No, but I don't believe in best. I believe in most appropriate for the scenario. So by having a set experience, a sort of immersion in, you know, Liz Greene process astrology that we just talked about with Nick Campion, or Michael Meyer, or go back all the way into Violins if you need to, right? So whatever it is, you're just experiencing it as a relationship between you and the astrological ancestor. And then when anyone comes to you, whether it's a student or a client or whomever, you know how to respond from whichever vantage point's going to connect best to that person. And if I'm crawling around the Badlands, I just want to take a lot more time to get to know Michael better. For anybody who's writing daily horoscopes listening to this, you've got to get this book because it's super helpful. And it's also just because of the frenzy. Like when you're reading, it just gives you this kind of energy that was coming out of the 20th century that I really like.
Oh, I love that explanation. And I think that's so true that a couple of things. One of the things I personally love about astrology is there's always something new to learn. There's just like, you could just live for the rest of your life until you're 100 and something, and you could still never learn everything that there is to learn about astrology.
No, you'd need like 500 lifetimes for real.
Totally. Yeah, totally. But also, I love that idea of coming at it with really fresh eyes and sort of this idea of beginner's mind. Mm-hmm. Because when you come at something with that sense of curiosity, it really opens you up to whatever's on the page, you know?
Yeah. And then you can appreciate it for what it's trying to say as opposed to prejudging it in the same way that astrology is prejudged by people who don't know how to do it all the time. Like, why should we do that to each other?
Yeah. So you've got 2 handbooks. You've got a medical handbook. You've got a humanistic astrology handbook.
Yeah, I guess I did that, didn't I?
And what's your third text?
My third text is super thin and super essential. And if you don't have it, pause the tape, pause the show, tape. Here I am.
Yeah.
You made me bring up Alan Oken, and now I'm like right back into it. Like, yeah, I used to walk around with a Walkman thinking about astrology symbols. So pause the show and go to Amazon right now and type in Rod Suskin, who was our New Year's Day episode.
No, go to bookshop.org.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know if it's available there, but yes,
Okay.
go to bookshop.org. Okay. And get the rules of chart interpretation. Now, I'm going to be really frank about this. He wrote this book for his students. And if you're not his student, change that life choice because you should be. But he wrote this book for his students because he really wanted it's so thin. I mean, it's thinner than a pencil.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Thin. This is the most gravitationally heavy, thin book. It's like a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Anyway, so the reason why this book is essential is that it literally is the most distilled and succinct application of traditional astrology you will find anywhere.
Oh, wow.
No BS. Get right into it. Literally like, do this, do this, do this, do this. Voila.
My Virgo planets love that.
I know. The bibliography will blow your mind. The bibliography, we've got Holden, Bonatti, Dykes, Crane, Dykes, Frawley, Holding, Lehman, Lilly, Moran, Ptolemy, Zoller. Also, at the end, there's an appendix with the rules, and you just have to go down the list and check them off. Like, okay, this. And if I'm in the middle of nowhere, the last thing I want to do is lug around 10,000 astrology books.
Right, sure.
So I'm going to pack this little number to remind me.
That'll fit easily in your backpack.
Absolutely, right? I can fly. Your astrology will fly with this book. And I say that, I was his student. I was a recipient of this as, receiving the rest of his curriculum. And it's just been a constant companion since because it's so distilled. You just can't beat it. I love it.
That's quite an art form to be able to take something that's really complex like astrology and just break it down into understandable chunks.
And make it this small.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say he's one of my main astrological mentors as well, so I'm sort of bigging up my own lineage here. But I think that, if you really like how I talk about astrology, like Rod was one of my main teachers, and this book is one of the tools that he uses to help that happen. So I just have to recommend it, and I would take it with me because I love it. It's just something that's been a way that I've sharpened my own astrology completely, and it's always useful.
It says a lot that you're sitting in a library of 10,000 books, and that's one of the 3 that you would bring. That's amazing. And just so folks know, Rod Suskin was on episode 26 of the podcast. So go listen to that again. I'll link it in the show notes. That was a good episode, too.
Yeah, I love Rod.
So, Jen, you were a student of Rod's. What books would you recommend for beginners?
Oh, man. Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit, again, kind of speaking to my own work with astrological publishing. It's kind of hard to avoid when that's literally what I do.
Yeah, totally.
One of my favorite books that I love to have people read when they're astro-curious and also somewhat beginning or astro-fluent. So not somebody like who has no idea what astrology is at all, but somebody who's just getting into it going, I love astrology! And it's like, okay, you need to read Astrology's Plurality and Diversity in the History of Astrology, edited by Nick Campion and Liz Greene. And the reason why is that in this work, if you just read through it, maybe like a sitcom or something like that, each article in the anthology is different, but by the end of the experience, you will understand that what you think you know astrology is not. It will truly ground you in a sense of the title, Astrologies. There are as many astrologies as there are belly buttons. And we use this word, astrology, as a noun. It says one thing, astrology. You think, oh, that's a thing. But astrology is something people do. It's a human practice. And humans have various cultures and different geographies and different temporalities. And so their astrology is by nature different. One can say traditional astrology, and yet there's actually complete nuance and multiplicity, even though under the overarching scheme of things, we think that when you're doing traditional astrology, you're all kind of doing the same thing. But if someone is working from a Hellenistic standpoint, medieval astrology is quite different. And even inside of that medieval spectrum, medieval Islamic astrology is not medieval European astrology. And so suddenly you get this insect eye, all these refractive lenses showing you how various astrologies work, sometimes in concert, sometimes in contrast. And then you realize, like, having to say things like, what's the best house system? Or what's the best system of bound definitions, that sort of essential dignities where the bounds are variously carved up. It's like, why pick? Know them all. Use them all in context. Use them all when it's necessary. Like this idea of like, well, that doesn't work, so I'm not going to use it. It's like, well, maybe it doesn't work in that scenario, but it does work in this one. So it just allows you to become, again, a lot more aware of what you can explore and less judgmental about like, well, I learned astrology like this and it's the real astrology. It's like, no, it's a way of doing it. And there are so many others, including the ones that we're making together right now.
I love that. It's a big toolbox. It's not just one umbrella, right?
Yeah. And like, look at people who collect tools. It's like, do you need another wrench? And it's like, hell yeah, I do. You know, I want them all. And then I want them in pink and I want them in turquoise, you know? So it's like, you can never have. I'm a tool junkie too. I like making crafts in my free time.
Oh, excellent.
Jewelry making and all these things to counterbalance the mental, you know?
Yeah. That's great.
Another one following on from astrologies would be a similar book in the same series by the Sophia Center Press, which is Sky and Symbol. The reason why I want to point people towards Sky and Symbol is not that I have an article in it, which is true, but the one that comes after me, which is Liz Greene. And in this one, she's talking about theurgy, and she's talking about Carl Jung. And the things that she says about Jung's work in this chapter of Sky and Symbol are absolutely phenomenal for trying to understand the role of how astrology entered Jung's world via his Red Book and Black Book. And it's just an unsung hero of what her work has done. So I know there's a lot of Liz Greene fans, and a lot of people have no idea that one of her best chapters is hidden in Sky and Symbol.
So it's just a bunch of different authors, is that right? It's a collection of essays?
It's an anthology. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So, there's an article also, or a chapter in here about the burning sun and killing Reshef, proto-astrological symbolism in the Ugaritic epic. Is astrology a symbolic language? Something on the Perugia fountain, astral bodies in medieval Germany. I mean, you've got, the landscape zodiac in Glastonbury with Anthony Thorley. It's a great book, but the piece by Liz Greene is a hidden gem of her body of work that no one's talking about enough. So I think, if you want to understand her work with Jung and astrology in a very deep academic way, it's sitting there at the end of Sky and Symbol.
Somebody could become a CAELi member and just come look at all these books that you're mentioning.
Yeah. And since that's just one chapter of this book, you could become a member and ask for it.
Awesome. Any other books for beginners?
Yeah, actually, there's one that I worked on with Nicola Smuts-Allsop, who co-taught her Fertility Astrology class with me, and the eponymous book, Fertility Astrology, with the subtitle A Modern Medieval Textbook. I worked with Nikki in helping edit this book, and she ended up being another teacher of mine who really brought across to me the utility of medieval astrology and how to apply it in a very specific context. So now we're circling back around to the medical. And also because I just really loved, like when I was in high school, like truth be told, I just really loved drawing like sperms and eggs and like weird stuff like that. And just the reproductive system, like don't get pregnant, but look, here's like funny pictures of, human development and all these kinds of things. And I mean, who isn't interested in their own body when they're going through like puberty and stuff? So I took it from that artistic standpoint. And when I met her, I was like, oh my gosh, you get people pregnant? I want to know everything you know. And she's like, well, we're going to get medieval. And I'm like, oh, even better,
Yeah.
And so when I was working with her on this, I was trying to create the book I wanted, the book she wanted, but I was thinking about it also like if you didn't want to go through the whole process of this pressure-filled learning medieval astrology, like that's like a lot. It's a Trojan horse. You want to learn medieval astrology really, really fast? You can pick up her book and hack your way into it from the outside in. And it's just a brilliant dance. I love it. I just love what medieval can do. I say that again in awareness of my previous recommendation of astrologies. I think there are facets of the Persian and Arabic and Jewish influence on astrology after the Hellenistic period that really unfold some beautiful techniques and that, were almost pinnacles of participation in what astrology can be before rationality and the Enlightenment kind of allowed some of that majesty to have to get a little like polished or duller or like flattened by something, burnished, if I wanted to go back to my jewelry tool. Yeah. So I just think that's a really cool one. And again, here I am choosing the books of the people I love, but I love them.
issues of infertility are a big deal for a lot of folks. And so I'm really glad that you mentioned this one so that people can understand that this type of thing is out there.
Yeah, and it's not on the wish list yet, so I had to put it on.
Yeah, totally.
No, it is a really important book, I think, and it's a lot. I mean, I think it's award-worthy just because the originality of the way Nikki has combined medieval astrology with, there's cutting-edge modern astrology in there, too. She uses solar arcs and midpoints as well. It's a very critical component. So it's not like you're only going to stick with the medieval. It's just fusing essential elements of medieval together with some of the best developments in the 20th century. So, I mean, how can you go wrong? It's a good model.
This book and the other books that you've mentioned haven't been talked about on the show before. So you're bringing all of these new texts to people's awareness, too.
Yeah, I'm like waiting there like a little spider, like, are you going to mention my favorite books, guest?
Now you get to mention your own favorites.
But honestly, it's hard. You know, I realized like, oh my gosh, how challenging. I'm asking my guests to pick 3. And I'm like, how can I pick 3? I mean, look at this place.
Yeah, it's good to put you in the hot seat.
Oh, yeah, it's a totally eye-opening thing. And I mean, I love an April Fool's joke. So thank you, everybody, for listening along and letting me foreground my beautiful producer and her wonderful body of work. And
thanks, Jen.
Dulcet tones of her voice. Because I think it's very important. One thing I do want to emphasize before we let everybody go is that I'm very committed to also flipping the script on how people, quote unquote, do business. Like a lot of podcasters don't let someone know that there is a producer and they just pretend that they've conjured this beautiful show out of the ether. And I don't like that kind of erasure of critical labor. So I'm very grateful to you, Jen, for helping me make this show what it is and being present as a personality on it and always contributing the show notes. And I'm happy to see your name down there. Like, she's writing the show notes, y'all.
I know. You from day one were like, let's put your name on the bottom of the show notes. Let's let people know that you're involved in this. And I so appreciate that. You've been so great to work with on this show. And it's been really awesome sitting in front of the mic here with you today and allowing me to put you in the hot seat to answer some of these questions that you've been asking other folks. So where can people find you and learn more about you?
Well, I'm going to point you...
They know where to find CAELi, but where to find you?
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, you can find me at CAELi, right? But my website is www.jennzahrt.com, and people love spelling my name wrong. So, JENNZAHRT.com. My website's just a landing page, and it points to all the other things I'm up to, but... if you have not jumped in yet, I just started another round of my Leaps and Bounds class, which is a bi-weekly deep dive into looking at the world through the bound rulerships of the essential dignities. And this year, we're going to be doing it from the sidereal and tropical at the same time, kind of like a chameleon with eyes looking in 2 different directions. And there are about 12 regular people in the conversation, and I would love to have anyone called to working in that way. Just check out the page and look at the class and maybe hop in.
Very cool. Well, I love what you're doing with CAELi. I look forward to many, many more episodes to come. So thanks again for being a guest today on your show, Within Orb.
Thanks so much, Jen.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library or to become a member, visit our website at caeli.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jen Braun, signing off for now. See you next time.